So, yes, chat. Today I am going to be discussing with you the latest events in Ukraine in regards to the war, the repositioning of the Russians, where Ukraine is taking land back, why they might be taking back so much land, and also the wider redeployment of the Russians for the impending and looming large offensive that they will be unleashing in the Donbass front in the near future. And also, as well as in Ukraine, I will also be talking about some instances as of late, and I've lost it. Not the best start to a video, but there it is there. Some instances as of late where Ukraine has essentially, in small ways, have actually begun to strike back into Russia proper. They're rather inconsequential in terms of military terms, strikes, but nonetheless, it is sending a message. And today, especially, Ukraine is making a big show about how it is able to strike targets around the Belgorod area in Russia, which, as you can see, is very close to Kharkov. This was one of the main staging areas for the Russian invasion, especially into Kharkov. So this is arguably, yeah, I think it is. In terms of territory that the Ukrainians still control, this Kharkov area, Belgorod is it's really the only significant population center that in Russia that is within any sort of feasible firing distance of Ukrainian artillery. Some Ukrainian helicopter attacks. In terms of the Tojka, the ballistic missile, that gives Ukraine a bit more options, and I will also go into some previous strikes that Ukraine has done in the Rostov area with Tojka missiles earlier in the war. I'm just trying to figure out what way should I start this. Start on the Ukrainian strikes, or will we start on? Okay, I'll tell you what, since I've talked about it at length, we'll just tie up what is happening in Ukraine. So, there is a lot of interesting chatter coming out of the northwest of Kiev. There is a lot of chatter from the American intelligence community, bits and bobs here from the Ukrainians, although if it was actually true, I would have expected the Ukrainians to really make a bit more of a show of it. But the allegation is that all the Russian troops in Gostomel, in Bucha, all the way up to Chernobyl, apparently overnight, just decamped and abandoned position. I am skeptical of this because this is hard fought territory, heavy fighting for a month to hold this territory. So for the Russians to just give up land and quite a strategic position they hold, it puts a lot of pressure on Kiev. It requires the Ukrainian government to deploy a lot of military assets, check any Russian activity in this area. So if the Russians just up sticks left, it's I don't know how to take it. Assuming it has indeed happened. Oh, what have I just got? For apologies, I've just been accepted in a new Telegram group. That for the meantime, and have a look at that whenever I have a bit of time to get more of a gander at it. But so if we just, for argument's sake, assume that the Russians have just essentially abandoned the entire western bank of the Dnieper, the west of Kiev, that would be quite significant. Because even though the Russians pulled out the VDV, I was under the assumption that there's still potentially a couple of tens of thousands of Russian troops, Russian material, Russian equipment quite heavily engaged in this area. The assumption I would have made is that these troops would have put on the defensive to just preoccupy and tie down a lot of Ukrainian military assets around this area. So if they have just abandoned it, I at this stage I honestly don't know what to make of it if that has indeed happened. And I'm increasingly seeing stuff that might suggest it has happened. So just for sake of argument, let's see, I will put up some footage that has come out today. One of of the bits of footage actually came out yesterday, from what I could see of the earliest part of. Essentially, the earliest time that this was posted on Twitter was about 9 hours previous. Whenever I seen it about 7 o'clock this morning, which would assume that it was filmed yesterday, daylight in the footage. So, so this is footage of Gostomel Air. Pardon me. This is Gostomel Airport. This is reported to have been taken essentially yesterday. I'll let the footage play for a bit, but as you can see, if you look on Google Maps, that's the sort of aircraft graveyard. There looks to be some kind of military trucks here. I don't know if they've been burned or what, but these look to me to be some kind of Russian military vehicles of some kind, most likely trucks. So this is the sort of Antonov works around the actual tarmac itself. And this is the Mira, world's largest plane, or what remains of it. So as you can see, this is identifiable as Gostomel, but the main thing is this is a Ukrainian drone, a civil drone, a civilian drone. This isn't a military drone, but from all the footage, if you look through my Telegram channel, you will see whenever there's footage come out of Gostomel, it is a hive of activity. As you can see, all the tire marks here, and here it is Ghost Town. This is the area, the VDV, the Russians, look, you can see there, those look like dug-in emplacements for artillery or tanks. So, from this footage alone, here's more dug-in emplacements where so for people who aren't aware, there's a technique called, not hold down, but if you want to try and put your tanks in a more defensible position, or if you have artillery pieces, you'll dig up sand barriers around them. So if artillery comes around near them, the shrapnel or whatever will harmlessly bounce off the sand or the mud. So that's what these little things here, but as you can see, there's nothing in them. Plus, this drone was able to get to Gostomel and hasn't been shot down, so it's very interesting. Like I say, it's very surprising to me if the Russians have indeed done this. You can see all the tire tracks through the fields. So this would have been a hive of activity of Russian tanks coming and going, logistics vehicles coming back and forth, but it's dead. Yeah. So that's some very interesting footage. And there is another bit of footage that I was able to actually locate the exact position it was filmed at. Have a look and see if I can quickly find it. Really need to put a bit more prep into these streams. Here we go. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go to my favorite website. Twitter. But don't worry, we will not be on Twitter for long. So we just look at this footage here.
Нормально. Бывает.
This looks like this guy is on a bicycle or something. So as you can see, there's battle damage. So this is definitely after the war has started. This isn't faked. And there's a very particular set of buildings he comes across that helped me identify exactly where this guy was. I think coming up here. So as you can see, it's dead. There's no activity on the street, which is very surprising. So pay note of that build of, not so much this, because this is being built in the Google Earth footage, but the building, does he scan back over to it? Well, this building with the red roof, just pay attention to that. So that particularly, he seems to have filmed himself. I'm assuming he's on a bicycle, but he just seemed to have cycled all the way from Irpin, all the way up into Bucha, up into the Gostomel area. So with that footage in mind, here you go. That is that building. See, that is a perfect match for that building there. let's have a look of where exactly this is filmed. So so that's a petrol station. Those buildings are being built here because this was taken in May 2015, but those are those black buildings footage. He seems to have come up from this road, from down this direction. But where exactly are we looking at here? Oh, do out. Oh, is that? Yeah. Yeah, there it is. So there's that wet red building there. And look at where this is. So just for people to get an idea of the names of some of the places you've probably heard a lot of, this is Bucha and this is Irpin. So this is the area where there's been the heavy fighting since the start of the war. But this, as you can see, this is quite a very strategic road. And this guy just seems to have cycled. See, orient. Yeah, so he seems to have cycled actually from the Bucha area. But I've orientated myself correctly here. So if that's so, he seemed to have cycled down in round here. So he seems to have actually come from Gostomel, which is here, or from Bucha. These are areas that are meant to be under Russian control, and he seems to have cycled down in there. And as you can see, this is part of a main road that goes into the Kiev area. So it's perplexing. If this was filmed today, is I would expect there should be Russians all over this area because of how strategic this crossroads is. If not fighting in the area, but as you can see in that footage, it looks pretty much abandoned. And this was footage that was taken on both sides this morning. So if the Russians have abandoned it, I would have assumed like the Ukrainians would have been, especially into the Bucha area, into these areas, very quick to put out footage, say that they have indeed retaken these areas, because this if the Russians have just abandoned it, this is quite a big victory for Ukraine. Maybe not so much, well, I guess it is in terms of the casualties they've inflicted on the Russians, but just in terms of the symbolic value that the Ukrainians were able to completely push back, whether they actually did or not is up to your interpretation. I don't think they have, but essentially if the Russians have abandoned this area, it relieves so much pressure on Kiev, and Kiev could present it as quite a significant victory. On top of this, there was some claims came out that said that the Ukrainians are now in Borodyanka, which was held by the Russians. And then also, if I can find the other footage, look, oh, look, it's video footage that was taken. It's pretty potato quality, but either way, just disclosure, I won't show it if I find it. Videos. Yeah, here it is. Go to message. Here. So the claim is this town here, Ivakov, is fallen. This is the footage of it. So what apparently YouTube monetization, just ignore this. What this footage is apparently showing is rear elements of... What did you just call that guy an onion? Well, what this is apparently showing is rear elements of the Russian quote-unquote retreat that were ambushed while leaving this town. So I can't really verify this footage because this video quality is a bit potato, but have a look. Start. This looks like a big roundabout ring road. So if we just have a quick, let's have a quick gander at Knivekov and see if we can. I think that conveniently might be what is shown in this footage. This roundabout thingy here. That would It does look like this area here in this footage. So yeah, the allegation is that as the Russians were retreating or pulling out, or however you want to word it, is their rear elements appear to have been hit by Ukrainian troops in some kind. And also, if this town is indeed so, and then the other argument, if the Russians haven't pulled out of the northwest of Kiev, if this town has fallen to Ukraine, it's very bad news for any Russian troops that might still be in this area, because as you can see, this is essentially the only real main road that provides logistics all the way up into Belarus. So there's, I don't know what to make of it. I really don't. The footage that I've seen so far seems to have suggested that the Russians have indeed bugged out, but I would expect to be hearing a lot more about it so far. So this is something I'm going to have to keep an eye on over the next few hours, in the next couple days. So yeah, I honestly don't know what to make of it until pardon me, until we get confirmation one way or the other, because I was assuming that the Russians would hold on to this area, is that they'd just rotate out the VDV. They'd rotate in and rotate out troops to just keep this pressure on in the north of Kiev. But if they've completely just pulled out of the area, it's I don't know. I don't know what to make of it. Yeah. Because, like I say, there is a lot of Ukrainian troops all around this area, like significant amounts of them and material. And now they will all be freed up to go to other fronts, more pressing fronts. The other aspect is the Russians are slowly pulling back their forces here, which is understandable because, again, refer to my previous streams, this long, vulnerable logistics train that they have to go, which is pretty much always under ambush or attack in some form. So here I could understand why the Russians are slowly pulling back their forces. But here, just it confuses me. It really does. I guess you could make the argument that the Russians are just going to redeploy all their troops from there to fight in the Donbass. But I would have thought strategically is that they achieve more by being here and tying down more Ukrainian troops. Because, like I say, this pressure on Kiev demanded that Kiev responded by having a significant amount of its troops to check any potential Russian adventures towards the city itself. So, I say that is something we'll have to keep an eye on. In jet, pardon me. Take another drink. Oh, pardon me. Also in jet. Well, just a second. Apologies. Yeah, I muted myself so you didn't have to hear me cough up my lungs. So, Ukraine has also been reclaiming quite a few small settlements and towns in the Sumy Chernigov area, sort of in this area around here. Also around here at Trosnyansk, so there's sort of like a axis around. I wish I could like draw on the map here to give you an outline, but this sort of oblong shape around here. Ukraine has been reclaiming quite a lot of villages and towns. I think that is because the Russians are pulling back in part of this strategic redeployment from the Sumy, Chernigov, Kiev fronts to focus primarily on Kharkov, but especially the Donbass area. So I think that is why the Ukrainians seem to be getting a bit of momentum behind them. While Trosnyansk did seem to be quite a significant battle where the Ukrainians legitimately did seem to quite land a fairly decent defeat on the Russians. But in terms of all the small settlements that seem to be falling into Ukrainian hands, I think that's what happening is it's just a general withdrawal of the Russians. I would imagine, although this kind of might throw a spanner into my thinking, but I would imagine it's the Russians withdrawing to more sustainable positions, keep up an entrench on the siege in Sumy and Konotop and Chernigov. That's what I would assume they were doing. That was what would make sense because I Like, if the Russians have just arbitrarily pulled all the way back to the Belarusian border, and if they pull back to the Russian border here, that would be very bizarre. I wouldn't be able to understand the thinking of that, because then, yeah, I don't think the Ukrainians, if they have pulled back, are just going to arbitrarily invade Belarus. But, you know, here along the Russian border, especially given events in Belgorod, I think Ukraine might, for symbolic reasons, try and cross the border in certain parts if the Russians do attempt that. So I don't think the Russians are just going to pull back to Russia. I think they're looking to pull back to more sustainable defensive lines around the cities they've currently entrenched, as more of their troops are pulled back. So small the fronts will be shorter. There's less troops needed to man and hold the fronts, so that excess men and material that's no longer needed can be redeployed to the Donbass front. So that is kind of what my assessment of what seems to be happening on the northern front in Ukraine so far are going. Although that could all be completely thrown apart if it's confirmed one way or another what's happened in the northwest of Kiev. So, pardon me. Now, obviously the big story is what is developing in the Donbass. Latest news that I've seen is the Russians have apparently completely cleared the south of Izium, which bit later than I would have expected. But saying that, apparently it appears that the Ukrainians have destroyed both road bridges across the Donets River, which is certainly a big spanner in the works of the Russians. So the Russians are going to have to put up a sustainable pontoon bridge. Hope the Ukrainians don't find it and shell it. But if the Russians are going to keep up this offensive from Izium down towards Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and to the rear of the Ukrainian positions in the Donbass, the Russians are going to have to try and set up a sustainable crossing of this river. The only bridge that seems to be standing is this bridge I made a post about earlier on. Because this is an active battlefield, or it was, like I say, the latest news seems to be that the Russians have completely secured the entirety of the town, so the Ukrainians are military is somewhere probably around this area. Is obviously because the bridges are destroyed. Russian food distributions, feeding the local population, can only happen north of the river until they can properly secure a crossing south of the river. So everyone who still remains in this part of the town is relying on this bridge. And if you look through the telegram where I might specifically speak about this bridge is damaged. It looks like one of the trusses has been completely destroyed. So that's probably not ideal for the local civilian population if this is the only way for everyone here to essentially go north to collect their food and essential supplies from Russian supply distributions. So apparently there is increasing fighting all along the Donets River. I don't know if it's the Russians or the LNR are trying to find another bridge to cross Donets. In fact, if we just have a quick look, if there does happen to be any other crossings, looks like one there. Doesn't look very big though. Oh, have a look. I wouldn't know who's currently in control of that one, but it's railroad. Where are we looking? River here. So there are a couple other bridges, which, if they're not already in Russian control or Ukrainian control, that both sides will probably try and make a priority to try and control. So these bridges in this area, sort of downstream from Izium, because, as I say, you have to understand is that the bulk of the Ukrainian army is sort of based in this sort of space here. So they're all facing the troops from Donetsk and Lugansk. And as fighting in Mariupol starts to wind down, so for people who aren't aware, the latest battle maps, pardon me, seems to supply that the Russians have now split the city potentially into two or into three separate sections. So this part of the city seems to be held by Ukraine. Another pocket somewhere around here seems to be held by Ukraine. And there does, from some of the maps, seem to be a lingering presence of Ukrainian troops in the Avostal metallurgical plant. So it's a lot longer than I was expecting, but we are starting to look at last days of Mariupol. The city is now in at least two, if not three, distinct chunks that the Russians, DNR, and Chechens are slowly clearing. So I've already seen evidence where it appears the Russians are starting to pull troops out of Mariupol, start to deploy them north towards the Volonovka area to sort of along this front line, which is, I think the front line is running somewhere around this general area here. So you have to, as I've said in a couple of previous streams, if the Russians are able to properly get across the river in Izium or along these places, push down here, a big push up from the Mariupol area, meet somewhere around here, completely encircle all the Ukrainian military forces in this area, that would be a very significant development in the war. That would be one of the big strategic wins that Russia I don't want to say desperately, but Russia does need to start showing that it is making significant progress in the field. And this would definitely be one of those big, one of the big markers of that. The Ukrainians are obviously blatantly aware of this, so there is a lot of footage coming out. Again, just look through the Telegram, you'll see it, of a significant build up of Russian vehicles, armor, and troops in the Donetsk and Lugansk areas. So, uh, for all those people who are thinking, yeah, there's a lot of footage coming out of Russian vehicles being destroyed, you've not seen anything yet because I think Russia can field has like 30,000 tanks it can field. So yeah, the footage I have seen would be quite disheartening to the Ukrainians because the Russians seem to, in equipment wise at least, be easily able to replace their losses in equipment and vehicles quite handedly. So attrition wise, it doesn't look like it's going very well for Ukraine. There is Russian air power, and that seems to be constantly in operation in this area. Every day, there's constant footage coming out of Russians UAVs directing artillery onto Ukrainian vehicles. Russian Su-25s, they usually work in pairs, constantly hitting targets within the battle space. So it is looking increasingly grim for Ukraine in this area. Although saying that, it does appear that Ukraine itself is starting to pour in men and material. The wisdom of that, I guess, we will have to wait to be seen. But just interestingly, one thing I did make a note of is that there was a report in Dnieper within the local shopping center that there was a detachment of Polish foreign volunteers were set up. I'm assuming that that is because those foreign volunteers, those Poles, are probably waiting to be deployed into the Donbass front because, I say, depending what has actually happened in Kiev, this is going to be the biggest crucial front of the war. So if the Russians have indeed just pulled out all their forces, I think that's probably a bad move for them to make because that would mean that all these Ukrainian troops, a lot of these foreign volunteers that seem to be engaged up here, could be deployed to these fronts to keep up pressure, but most of all, potentially be deployed down to the Donbass front where they could try and stymie the Russian play here. So yeah, Donbass is going to be the story of the war so far whenever it really starts to erupt. So, depending how long it takes the Russians to fully redeploy all their forces from the north of Ukraine, if that is indeed what is happening, maybe sometime next week, maybe early, mid next week, is we could start to see the big start of the Russian offensive within the Donbass. The way it's looking out, like I say, there is significant Russian troops being deployed within this area, so it looks like they might be trying to force their way straight through the middle. Could be to tie down the Ukrainian army to prevent it from cutting and running. But I would expect, again, the biggest thing to expect that I would make if I was a Russian general from sitting from my very comfy armchair is the logical move for me is encirclement. Is just try and encircle this from the rear of these hard points instead of going in and having a brutal battle like Mariupol to forcibly take Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. To a degree, Servo Donetsk, because I believe that is encircled by three sides. I think it's across the river that Ukraine still has connection to the city. But instead of, as in Mariupol, where it has been quite a bruising city battle, um, I would say for the Russians, the best thing to do is just encircle the general Ukrainian army, defeat it in this open ground, take these small villages, uh, form a defensive front along here, have your troops work on the Ukrainian army out in the field, force them into Slavyansk, Kramatorsk. Severodonetsk will probably fall by then, but to try and force them into these cities, and then essentially just tell the DNR and the LNR to, okay, this is your battle. I would don't go into the cities to physically take them. Just besiege them. Just let the Ukrainian forces in there, wither on the vine. Just prevent any big breakouts. So the Russian army in the field here can just decide to move on up country, be it towards Dnipro. I think more likely it's going to go for the south of Kharkov and Poltava, and just trying to hollow out Ukraine from east of the Dnieper. So that's kind of my assessment of what we could see. And like I say, from my very comfy armchair, that is what I would do if I was a Russian armchair general. That kind of makes a bit more sense to me. Then the other story is some interesting moves in the Kherson area. So it appears that the Russians have largely pulled back from this sort of area. Ukraine is claiming that that's a massive win. Again, I think it's more the Russians have just pulled out as opposed to the Ukrainians forcing them out. But if anyone remembers our good friend Jihadi Julian Ropoch, I forget how you pronounce his second name, the very knowledgeable German reporter who seems to think that the Kremlin is going to fall to the Azov battalion in the next couple of weeks. About a week ago, he said that the Ukrainian army had started its offensive and was in the process of liberating Kherson. Well, the events on the ground, from what I have seen, have kind of contradicted that to a large degree. It appears that indeed the Ukrainians did launch some kind of offensive out of this area, but in this area they got quite badly mauled by the Russians. I haven't seen a lot of footage to confirm it one way or the other, but the reports that I've seen is in the space of a 5-hour battle is that the Ukrainian army in this area was, I don't want to say completely destroyed, but it was quite badly crippled to the extent that they had to retreat back in force into Nikolaev. The Russians don't seem to have advanced after them, so I think the Russians have just taken a general defensive posture in this area. But there were the local governor and city administration in Nikolaev put out the call to local civilian population that they were in dire need of blood supplies, and that to me, I mean, would back up the claim that the Ukrainian army suffered quite a significant defeat in this area with quite a lot of casualties. So that is what appears to have happened in Kherson for the past since I've last been able to stream on the matter. So do I think that is I think I touched on Trosnyanets in the last stream. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, so I don't think I need to go back into it. If anyone's interested, I did cover the battle that Ukraine seems to have won. Quite a bruising victory over the Russians in this area. In my previous stream, it is up on YouTube if you're interested to go and watch that for the specifics on that battle. And also, I believe I used it as an example to point out how I try to verify some of the more dubious or big claims that both sides make. So if you're interested in that, I recommend you just go have a quick watch of that video. And then with that, I think we will go to the big story of the day and just in general. So for people who aren't aware, within the first week or so of, let's have a look, actually see if it comes up. Okay, so that must be the airbase there. That does look like a military airbase. Yeah. So this must be it here, unless there is a second airbase in Milarovo. Quick look. No, that looks to be the only airbase in the area, so that must be it. So for people who can't remember or don't know, within the first week, Ukraine fired one of their Toshka ballistic missiles. These are short to medium range ballistic missiles. In fact, I will just quickly orientate myself with the ever trusty Wikipedia. I know, but it's usually good for just this basic kind of stuff. So, what have we got range wise? Did they not even give us a range? Mass. Used by speed. Launch. Oh, it doesn't even give us a range. What does Ukraine use? Does it say what Ukraine uses? Ukraine, no, it doesn't. Let's talk about Milorova. Okay, Toshka U. Let's have a look. Is that listed? No. Well, generally they have a range of around about 100 to 150 miles. So, as you can see, this base is basically right on the Ukrainian border. So, easily within range of Ukrainian missiles. So, within looking at this, it says it was the first day. I can't remember exactly if it was on the first day, but Ukraine used a Toshka missile to target the airbase. They appear to have destroyed one Su-34. They look like MiG-29s. It's like a Su-34 there. Yeah, these look like Su-34s. So that would make up for what is, I can't say when this was taken, not so much, but that would corroborate with what we are looking here. These do look like Su-34s. So Ukraine fired a Toshka. It appears to have destroyed one of the Su-34s on the base. Yeah, this is within Russian territory, even though it is very close to the Ukrainian border. Then a couple, I think it was then later in the week, there's Dagnorog. Is this the military base? Yes, this must be it here. Yeah, because those the illusions that were in the video. Is Ukraine seemed to have fired another one, another Toshka at this military base here, this air base. It appears to have been shot down, but potentially some wreckage from the missile then came down and maybe have damaged one of the as you can see, this isn't a fighter base. This is logistics strategic lift going by these illusions. So the wreckage from the missile might have come down and damaged one of the aircraft on the ground. But those were relatively. Oh, so not what's this? More, yeah, this is all a logistics airbase. So, so those were fairly minor. Just kind of more. If we happen to destroy something on the ground, we destroy something on the ground. But also for Ukraine, it shows that yeah, we have attempted to strike targets in Russia proper. Generally, after that, every now and again, there was reports of the Russians would shoot down a Toshka that was coming into Taganrog or Rostov or into the Belgorod area, but nothing really seemed to have been landing. That changed today in quite a big way because I will play the footage for people who haven't already seen it. Where is it? Early this morning, this happened. I hope this video is coming through in some quality for you guys so that it is intelligible. So these two appear to be Ukrainian Hind Mi-24 gunships, and they struck a fuel depot in Belgorod. So if I can find that fuel depot again, it seems to be the bane of my life. I keep losing track of it. That's the grain depot somewhere. Yes, here. So I think it might have been this fuel depot here because I wasn't able to find another Rosneft fuel depot in the Belgorod area from my quick scanning. Just to give you an idea, it's this area here. Here's the border with Ukraine. Here is Kharkov. So I will then play a bit more of the footage so you get an idea of what exactly the Russians, the Ukrainians were able to achieve for this. So This is some footage from the city itself of the oil depot in flames. So the strike itself is largely inconsequential. This isn't going to deprive the Russian army of fuel. This is not a military fuel depot. This is, if this is indeed the one, but from the footage I have seen elsewhere of it, is there is no military applications at all to this fuel depot. It is a civilian fuel depot used to essentially fuel the local civilian population. And from what the Russians are saying, only 2 of the holding tanks were destroyed. And the local Belgorod Oblast governor has said that there is 15 to 18 days supply of fuel left. And don't worry, in that time, because Belgorod is not being attacked on a regular basis in any form, is that fuel supplies within the local area will be uninterrupted and for people to go about their usual business. So just before I go even more into that, you just have a look for a bit more of the footage. Yeah, here we go. This is how we can identify the helicopters that were involved. So as you can see, anyone who has any basic knowledge about helicopters will understand this is the iconic shape of a Hind gunship. Also, if you can very slightly notice, there is a light patch on the tail. You just bring up. Let's see if that is what I think it is. So here we go. I think this is probably one of the better examples of what I can use for it. Not all Ukrainian Hinds use this sort of paint scheme, so I can't really corroborate it significantly one way or another. But as you can notice, there is very faint 2 white marks on the tail. That is a paint scheme that has indeed been used by the Ukrainian Air Force for some of their Hinds. Again, with the caveat, it is by no means a uniform across every single Hind that Ukraine does field, but that is what I think we are looking at. So if you notice, this is a Ukrainian Hind. You can sort of see the Ukrainian roundel just in there. It's a bit obscured by the shadow of the propeller, but those 2 white marks. And again, I know it's not the best quality, but you can very faintly see 2 white marks on the tail there. So and there's the second helicopter. Don't get too good of a look at that one, so you can't really positively idea, but I'm willing to bet it was a Hind. Again, a Ukrainian Hind, because I know some people are saying it is a potential Russian false flag, but the thing I want to note there is how fast this all took. So again, this is them leaving, so as you can see, that's the fire. They are moving very fast. It's in and out with this operation, which is what I would expect going by what they did, is that the Ukrainians, however they did it, and this will then expand onto the next point I want to make. So again, just orientating myself so I know exactly where I'm really bad at. So there, I'm pretty sure that is this area here. So it appears that somehow these Ukrainian Hinds, potentially flying very low to the ground, came across the battle lines, up across the Russian border, hit the target, and then I would assume they probably swung around here, going by the elevation of that video. This looks quite hilly around here, so maybe it came, just hit the target, flew around very fast, and just returned and went back into Ukraine. So that seems to be what has happened, and I'll have a look and see if there's a bit more footage on the events on the ground. So here, this will show a bit of the damage on the ground. As you can see, this is all civilian. The civilian fire departments dealing with it, because like I said, there doesn't seem to be any military application at all to the depot that was hit. So, and if I can find the second video I am specifically looking for, I'll play this. So then, because obviously the fuel depot was hit, the local population appears to have done a run on petrol stations this morning. And then that will expand into another point that I would like to make in a bit. Oh, well, it's nice footage to play either way, but this is a drone taken earlier today, showing the smoke plume in the fire itself at the refinery or the depot. So if anyone wants to watch that full, it's all in the Telegram. I've shared it from the sources. Quick look. Didn't spend too long looking for it because I guess it's not really that important, but okay. But either way, the fire was largely brought under control within space of a few hours. So in terms of actual strategic or even tactical value, the strike is rather insignificant. Like I say, there was no military applications that were apparent from the fuel depot. It appears to have just, yeah, this Russian troops at the front, Russian tanks are not going to be fueled because this fuel depot was hit, and the local population does not look to have really have suffered any ill effects in the rise of fuel, in shortage of fuel from it. So, in terms of the actual state of the war, it was pretty insignificant, but it's not the insignificance of the actual military applications that are the important thing, because this also happened today. So this is my caption of it, but a shell allegedly fired from Ukraine fell in the village of Nikolskoy, Belgorod region. There are no victims and no destruction. I think this is more footage of fire from Belgorod as opposed to the shell. But there might have been. Oh well. But also today, Ukraine appears to. So there's the smoke, but it also here because this fucking annoying watermark. For those who can't really make it out, there is a smoke trail here. So that's the smoke from the oil fire. There is a smoke trail there. That is it in a still photo. This is a Russian anti-air defense being deployed because it appears today that Ukraine also fired Toshka missiles. I can't read the Cyrillic, but I assume this is people commenting on it in the local area. But it appears that Ukraine has fired a Toshka missile, or potentially it was a drone. A Ukrainian drone was operating above the city. So that, and also what also happened today is, I guess it'll probably just be best going straight to. The problem is I can't really set all these stuff up because I have to keep looking through my own Telegram. Here it is here. So this is that artillery shell I was just talking about that seems to have caused no damage. That also fell in the Belgorod area. As you can see, it landed fairly harmlessly into a field, picked up a lot of dirt, debris, though it looks like to have damaged some of these telegraph poles, but as you can see, just going by the crater, this is not an inconsequential shell. Going by the distance, I would say this is probably one of the Pion heavy artillery guns is fired this shell. potentially a Smersh rocket, but I would expect probably a bit more damage in the surrounding area. But I think this is all part of a wider demonstration that Ukraine is trying to make, because it is quite noticeable. All in the space of one day, Ukrainian ballistic missile or drone is shot down right above the city. Ukrainian helicopters hit the city early in the morning, and also, okay, there's Nikos, that's handy there. And also, somewhere around here is this artillery shell seems to have landed in a field. So if you're looking at the distance, Russians hold all this kind of area here. So you're talking potentially that artillery piece probably had to be on the other side of Kharkov. So the only thing that could really pull off that kind of range would be a Smersh with a rocket assisted motor or a Pion artillery gun. So just so people have an idea of what exactly I'm talking about whenever I talk about a Smersh and a Pion. Pion, however you would pronounce it, I would promote it. I would pronounce it a Pion. Pion. I believe it's the NATO reporting name of it. But let me just bring up some footage of them in action. So, just to have an idea of what we're talking about, this is a Pion artillery gun. Although I think this might actually be the more modernized version of it. These guns can have a range of up to 80 kilometers potentially if they use the right ammunition. They fire very large shells, 203 millimeter rounds. I'll see if I have a bit more better footage of it. Yeah, so here is actually footage of a Ukrainian one in action. So as I say, potentially 80 kilometers in range if they use the right ammunition. A very large caliber. So that is what I'm thinking probably did fire at Nikolskoye in Belgorod. And then if it was a Smersh, just to give you an idea for people who aren't aware, look. So this is a Russian Smersh. Ukraine also operates the system. Essentially, they fire very large rockets. And they have a range of, I can't remember off the top of my head, but they're very long range artillery. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about. Why I think it was more a Pion than a Smersh is because it would be very strange for Ukraine to only fire one Smersh rocket into Russia. That would seem a bit strange to me. And also, I would expect someone somewhere would probably have found the rocket motor, because to get the range is there would have to have been a fair bit of fuel behind the rocket warhead to propel it as far to get to Nikolskoye from the area held by Ukrainian troops, and someone somewhere would have photographed or found the rocket motor, and we would have seen footage of it. So I think it was probably more high on. So what does this all mean? What does my manic rambling about various bits of Ukrainian artillery and weapons system? What is the bigger picture behind this? I think it is Ukraine starting to send a message. I think it is the Ukrainians deliberately, in a number of veins, mostly I would expect for international viewers, for its governments in the West. So if there was a story that was saying that the British, my beloved country, that always does everything right and never does anything wrong, as it is known to do with its stellar policy and diplomacy. But there has been a story that has emerged that says that the British are encouraging the Ukrainians to go all the way, to just keep fighting, to not let down. And apparently the British said that because the French, the Germans, and surprisingly, apparently also the Americans, essentially other NATO partners, are starting to feel that maybe Ukraine should start to press for some form of peace talks to start negotiating a bit more in strength. And the British don't think, for some reason, I don't know why, but the British government seems to have taken on the mantle as the most anti-Kremlin government in Europe. It's I couldn't speculate as to why, but that is what the British are apparently encouraging the Ukrainians to do. So, what the events in Belgorod could be is one. I'll go into the message for Russians in general, but I think largely it could be just for an international audience for any faltering NATO partners out there that might be thinking, yeah, Ukraine, maybe it's time to start looking to an end to this conflict. Ukraine could be saying, well, we are now striking targets in Russia. We are retaking ground in Ukraine, and now we are hitting Russian sovereign soil. So if your support for us are faltering, it is faltering at the wrong time because we are getting the initiative, we are getting the momentum. That is what I think the Ukrainians are trying to do with this. That is how I personally would read it. Obviously, I don't think that is an accurate assessment because I think the Ukraine is heading for a massive defeat in the Donbass. But I think that is the take that Ukraine is trying to present from these actions in Belgorod today. Is that is how they're doing it? Is you're hitting targets in Russia, we are winning. Don't cut off your support to us now because we're on the offensive. We need the men, we need the guns, we need the money. We have the men. Just give us what we need to win the war. Keep giving us it because we can win it here. We've demonstrated that we are winning it. I think that's kind of the message that Ukraine is trying to propagate through the events in Belgorod. Domestically, there's a number of ways it could be read. In general, I know people like to point to polling in Russia, and I don't know why people who would genuinely not believe polls in Western countries for some reason seem to just assume Russian polls are accurate. But the war isn't exactly the most popular thing in Russia, and I've gone over this in many of my previous streams because of family ties, because of the commonality in culture, in language, and all that kind of stuff. It's not as popular as certain people seem to think. So maybe the Ukrainians have judged if they can start making Russians on Russian soil start to experience the war, maybe that could cause a bit more discontent within Russia. But on the flip side of that, it could also backfire in quite a big way where Moscow, and if the Russian media is savvy enough, is they could portray this as we are is Russia is now under attack. Our war is a preventative war. We went to war with you. Well, obviously they don't call it a war; they call it a special operation. But we are trying to demilitarize and denazify Ukraine. That it is a preventative war to prevent a larger war down the line. And now look at what the Ukrainians are doing. The Ukrainians are now hitting civilian targets in Russia. We warned you about this. This is why we have to fight. This is why you have to support us. The Russian people must rally to the cause because this war in Ukraine is your war as well. So that's the way it could be presented in Moscow. So it'll be interesting to see if the Ukrainians keep trying to do more of these strikes in Russian sovereign soil and what the perception that would be in Russia, how that would go down in Russia. So that is something to keep an eye on. And then the wider point, um, which again I know is very unpopular with some people in my chat, but I have posted examples where the Russians themselves have even said it. So if let's have a look. Let's have a quick look. So yeah, I think it is a bit embarrassing for the Russians that this happened in the first place. Because again, the Russians hold this sort of territory here. So for two Ukrainian gunships, and I mean, for people who haven't experienced helicopters, let alone military helicopters, because military helicopters obviously generally have a stronger engine and they make a more distinct sound from civilian helos. for two Ukrainian gunships to not only fly out of this area but to cross the front line. You would assume some Russian soldier somewhere would have heard it and reported it, but not only that, to then cross the border, travel all this area, right up into. Yeah, this isn't a massive city of 1 million people, but it is a provincial city. It is a sizable city. For two Ukrainian helicopters to fly essentially, yeah, it is this fuel depot that I think it is, which is really bad. I keep losing track of it. I have senility of Google Maps. Here it is. Here. So as you can see, yeah, it's kind of on the suburbs, but it is still part of metropolitan Belgorod. So for two Ukrainian gunships to fly all the way up here, hit a target, and then, assumedly, because we haven't heard any word of them being shot down, return all the way back to Ukrainian territory. I mean that's embarrassing. Um, I would assume that is embarrassing. Granted, I've never worked in air defense, but like I say, that to me is a major lapse. Um, I I, I don't know what to make of it. Added to this, and I know there's a bit of a dispute on what happened in Mariupol, but uh, for people who aren't aware, there was a story of Ukrainian helicopters that flew down from this sort of area. I believe they were based out of Poltava, but so the front line, Volonovka, the front lines sort of run along here. So all this area is held by Russia, especially Berdyansk. Given the Toshka strike the other day, is that the Russians do have air defense in this area to shoot down ballistic missiles, but how they allowed free, apparently at least two, but apparently three Ukrainian Mi-8 helicopters to traverse all this area, land in Mariupol and pick up their crew. I mean, yeah, they were shot as they came down, as they left, but I know some people are saying, "Oh well, the Russians must have known that they were going in to rescue people." Well, if the Russians knew that, so what are you saying? Is that the Russians just allowed them to fly down there? Is that they told their guys to fly down there, pick up these guys, and fly them out, and get shot down on the way out? That doesn't really make sense to me. Because why wouldn't you just shoot them down on the way in? Because you don't know what was in the helicopters. Could it have been supplies? Could it hypothetically have been a couple more experienced fighters that they were trying to fly in and then to fly out wounded? Why wouldn't you just shoot down the heli? Because these people in the city are dead anyway. They're dead or they're captured. There's no rescue for them. So if you're allowing helicopters to fly in, potentially fly in men and equipment, if those helicopters were full of javelins or NLAWs, that could be a fair few more tanks lost in this battle. So I'm a bit skeptical on the idea that the Russians have penetrated the local Ukrainian military to the extent that they knew exactly the path it was going to fly in and the path it was going to fly out. Because from what I've seen, and the Russians themselves seem to say, is that it was more by accident that the helicopters were discovered and shot down. So one of them was shot down over the Sea of Azov, and another one I believe was shot down round about this area here. So just to back that up, so this is the post in Cyrillic here, and this is my annotation of it. So this is kind of what I use, that even the Russians themselves, the Russian telegrams, kind of think that, yeah, there is something going wrong with our air defense. In Berdyansk, we allowed a Toshka missile to come through. It blew up a ship, caused a lot of damage. We've been able to shoot down the Toshka missiles, so there isn't really excuse. Okay, we've allowed Ukrainian helicopters to fly into Mariupol. Why were they there in the first place? And now two Ukrainian hind gunships who've traveled into Russia proper, hit a target within quite a significant city, and apparently appears to have returned to Ukrainian territory. So this isn't just me rambling. As I say, this post here in Cyrillic, and then I've translated it here. The Russians themselves are why is this happening? So nothing prevented Ukrainian helicopters from hitting civilian infrastructure, for example, the regional administration. The effect would be much greater than from an oil depot. So that post is saying if the Ukrainian Hinds instead fired rockets into local administration building in Belgorod, that would have made a bigger impact. But the Ukrainians hit the oil depot instead. And this is just another plus to yesterday's story of captured Azov residents. That 3 of 5, okay, apparently there was 5 helicopters from Mariupol still left. How many of them fly a day? Apparently, the 2 shot down were more of an accident. They just ran into a patrol with manpads, and there is no air blockade of Mariupol. In general, since the time since Matthias Rust flew from Finland to Moscow through half of European Russia, little has changed. So, for people who aren't aware, Matthias Rust, he was a German. He flew a Cessna, a small civilian aircraft. He flew from Helsinki, I believe it was. He flew this is back in the 1980s at the height of the Cold War. He was able to fly the small civilian aircraft all the way to Moscow, and he actually landed it on Red Square. So he landed a Cessna here. In fact, I'll bring up a picture of it just so you have an idea. And this was a massive embarrassment for the USSR because obviously, like, this is meant to be one of the world's great powers, and yet apparently some autistic German man, as you can see in this picture, is able to fly a small civilian Cessna and land it on Red Square. And this caused a massive scandal within the USSR. So this post on Telegram that's talking about Matthias Rust, it is saying that, yeah, we seem to have all the equipment. We are perfectly capable of shooting down these aircraft, but for whatever reason we're not. Is Matthias Rust was able to land in Red Square, and it seems since that time nothing much has changed because Ukrainian helicopters apparently are able to do what they want at will. So, let's have a look. See if there was. I think there was a couple of other posts. The Russian MOD pass. No, the Russian MOD doesn't seem to damaged by missile hit dodge, but crashed into this. Yeah, this is more post. This at the old one. I'll look at the new. But yeah, so for whatever reason, is Russian air defense, especially in terms of helicopters, does not seem to be as effective. Because the other thing is, as soon as these Hinds were detected, is where is the airbase? There is an airbase somewhere in Belgorod. I'm not too sure what is based at the airbase, but this is an active battlefront here. You would assume there'd be Russian aircraft active fairly regularly here. So if they aren't going to scramble aircraft from the local airbase to come down and shoot down and track and destroy those Hinds, like I say, there's just so many different. Yeah, every now and again, mistakes happen and flukes happen. But as that post was saying, Belgorod today, the other day it was Mariupol. Is they're just, for whatever reason, is there seems to be a bit of a problem with the Russian air defense whenever it comes to Ukrainian helicopters. But saying that is, I would imagine there isn't very many Ukrainian helicopters still operating. The Ukrainian Air Force, from what I've seen, appears to have been greatly diminished. Very few combat capable fixed wing aircraft that they can still put into the air. Most of their Su-25s, I think, is basically been destroyed. A lot of their helicopters, actually their Hinds as well. There is some kind of, see if I can just happen to quickly pick up on it. There is some kind of Ukrainian air base in the Kherson area. Oh well, yeah. Well, basically somewhere in this area of southern Kherson there was, at least anyway, a Ukrainian airbase that had quite a lot of Ukrainian Hinds. Some of them actually that partook in United Nations missions, still in their UN paint schemes, and with Mi-8 HIP helicopters that looked more of a repair base. But either way, the Russians were able to capture all those intact. From my understanding, is Ukraine did use Hinds quite extensively during the opening battle at Gostomel, but quite a few of those got shot down. So I don't think that Ukraine actually has very many helicopters left. So that could be a bit of a saving grace for Russia. But either way, it is kind of noticeable that these events were able to happen to begin with. It's, I don't know. I know people get tired of me saying incompetence, but is it incompetence? Is it poor communication? You know, did Russian soldiers indeed hear the helicopters coming over, try to report it, but it just took too long and the process was too laborious for the message to go up to command and alert local air defense units? It's just some things to ponder about what the full nature of what indeed occurred there. So, um, look. So yeah, here is a second post just for people who, because again, for some reason, people seem to have taken what I was saying earlier in regards to why Russian air defense seems to have failed. Some people seem to have taken it as a personal insult. So whenever I found Russians themselves commenting how bad it was, I've shared those into the group. So for people who aren't aware, this post here, from my understanding, if I'm not mistaken, this is the Wagner Telegram group. This is the Wagner PMC. This is their Telegram group. So this is the post in Cyrillic with some of the footage, and then this is the translation of it. The fire at the old oil depot occurred as a result of an airstrike from two helicopters of the armed forces of Ukraine, which entered the territory of Russia at a low altitude, said Vyacheslav Gladkov, governor of the Belgorod Oblast region. Recall that 2 days ago, the APU, that's the Russian translation for Armed Forces of Ukraine, already destroyed a warehouse of RAV, of the Armed Forces of Russia. I'm not too sure specifically what RAV is. I think that might be ammunition because it was an ammo dump, I think, was hit in Belgorod a couple of days ago. Of the Russian Federation near Belgorod, presumably using a Toshka U, both times air defense missile defense system from the Zvezda TV channel could not protect the Russian sky in the Belgorod direction, and so far there are no casualties, only due to the fact that the enemy chooses military targets for himself. So there you go. The way I'm assuming it's probably the translation isn't the most accurate thing, but that to me is whoever typed this out in Wagner is pointing out that, yeah, Russian TV might be saying that, yeah, well, in the same vein that Ukraine is winning the war because the great Twitter offensive is going from strength to strength. Wagner is saying, yeah, Russian air defense is working so well because Russian TV is saying it is. But in actual fact is we're getting off lucky because the Ukrainians are choosing targets that are not causing casualties whenever they hit them. That's we're getting off lucky with the way it's going. So there you go. That was a post from one of the big Russian Telegram channels I was talking about earlier on. That's a post from the Wagner group themselves, where both of them are pointing out there is something wrong with our air defense in this area, and not only in this area, also in Mariupol. So this isn't just me spurging out in my manic way, going, "Oh, Russia bad. Oh, isn't Russia shit?" and all this kind of stuff. No, as I keep trying to laboriously cram into people's heads, I don't allow my politics to dictate what I see in footage. And here, the Russians themselves are pointing out themselves there is a problem. There is something wrong here. Something's not working as it should. So, um, oh, pardon me. So with that, as I die, I think that is everything off the top of my head. I think there's anything else to spurg out. Apart from, like I say, or as I was saying earlier on, the Russians are pulling back in this area. Ukraine is taking ground in this area. Be interesting to see if the Russians have indeed pulled out of here, if they choose to pull out of Chernobyl. That would be an interesting move, but I don't think they would. But then what do I know? I didn't think they'd pull out from this area, but apparently they have. So, off the top of my head, I think that is everything. Yeah. So on that note, thanks for coming. Yeah, and I'll speak to you guys again soon.